The morning routine in my suburban home was always the same. The sun would rise, casting golden light across my modest backyard, and I would step outside with a bucket of feed, greeted by the enthusiastic quacking of my feathered companions. The ducks would waddle excitedly, creating ripples across the small pond I had built for them 3 summers ago. Most people keep dogs or cats, but me. I found peace in the simple company of my 5 pet ducks. Each duck had a distinct personality that made them special. Alexander was the leader, always first to the feed bucket and protective of the others. Bella was the troublemaker who enjoyed splashing visitors with her wings. Charlie was painfully shy, often hiding behind plants until he was sure the coast was clear. Daisy and Elvis were inseparable, always waddling side by side like an old married couple. They were more than pets to me. They were family. My home was nothing extraordinary. A simple one-story ranch-style house with a decently sized backyard that I had worked hard to transform into a natural sanctuary. The pond was professionally installed and properly maintained. The duck enclosure was clean, secure, and positioned far enough from property lines to comply with local ordinances. I had researched everything thoroughly before bringing home my first ducklings 3 years ago. Most of my neighbors seemed to appreciate, or at least tolerate, my unique hobby. Mrs. Peterson, the elderly woman next door, would sometimes bring her grandchildren over to feed the ducks approved treats. The Johnson family across the street would wave and comment on how the ducks were growing. Even Mr. Ramirez, who initially worried about noise, eventually admitted that the soft quacking was less disruptive than the barking dogs further down the block. But then there was Patricia Montgomery. Everyone called her Pat until she corrected them with a tight smile, insisting on her full name. She moved into the large corner house 6 months ago and wasted no time joining the HOA board. Within weeks, she had risen to vice president through aggressive volunteering, and what I would later discover was strategic manipulation. I first noticed her when she would slow her luxury SUV while passing my house, her eyes narrowing as she took in my natural, slightly wild landscaping that contrasted with her perfectly manicured lawn. The first interaction was brief but telling. Patricia stopped me as I collected my mail one afternoon. "The flowering bushes along your fence," she said without introducing herself. "They are not on the approved plant list for the neighborhood." Her voice was honey-sweet, but her eyes remained cold. I explained that the bushes were planted years before any approved list existed, predating even the HOA itself. She simply smiled, nodded, and walked away. It should have been a warning sign, but at the time, I dismissed it as a minor encounter. That evening, I watched my ducks floating peacefully on their pond, blissfully unaware that their very existence would soon become the center of a neighborhood power struggle. The setting sun cast long shadows across my yard as Alexander led his flock in one last swim before nightfall. If only I had known then how quickly my peaceful existence would be disrupted, perhaps I would have been better prepared for what was coming. The first violation notice arrived on a Tuesday. A white envelope with the HOA logo stamped in the corner sat in my mailbox. Inside was a formal citation for grass exceeding the maximum allowable height by approximately 1/4 inch. The fine was minimal, but the principle bothered me. I had mowed just 3 days prior. Nevertheless, I trimmed the lawn again and paid the $25 fine online. The second notice came exactly 1 week later. This time, I was cited for garbage receptacle visible from street outside of designated collection hours. I had brought the bin in 15 minutes after the garbage truck passed. Apparently, the allowable window was 10 minutes. Another fine, another payment, though this time with a sigh of frustration. By the fourth notice, this one for unapproved wind chime design emitting excessive noise pollution, I began to suspect these violations were not random. Every homeowner received occasional citations, but no one seemed to be accumulating them at the rate I was. The Hendersons had an unauthorized basketball hoop for months without comment. The Wilsons painted their door a shade of blue that was definitely not on the approved color chart. Yet somehow, my infractions, no matter how minor, were being documented with alarming precision. Patricia Montgomery had transformed from an occasional presence to an ominous shadow in my life. I would catch glimpses of her walking slowly past my house, her phone raised as if taking photos. Once, I spotted her writing notes while staring at my mailbox, which was identical to every other mailbox on the street. When we crossed paths at the local grocery store, she would smile sweetly and comment on the weather as if nothing was amiss. The quarterly HOA meeting revealed the extent of her influence. The community center was set up with neat rows of folding chairs, most occupied by neighbors I had known for years. The board sat at a table facing us, with Patricia positioned prominently beside the president, an older gentleman who seemed increasingly content to let her take the lead. I sat quietly through discussions of landscaping contracts and pool maintenance schedules, waiting for the open forum. When my turn to speak finally came, I calmly raised concerns about the frequency and nature of the violations being issued to my property. "I have received 7 notices in the past month alone," I stated, keeping my voice level despite my nervousness. "Some for violations that appear to be within acceptable margins of error, like grass height measured down to a quarter inch." Patricia interrupted before I could continue. "Point of order," she said, her voice carrying across the room. "Individual violation disputes must be submitted in writing to the board for review, not presented during open forum." She smiled at me with practiced sympathy. "HOA rules exist to maintain property values and community standards. Certain elements in our neighborhood have required more attention lately to ensure compliance." The board president nodded in agreement. "Patricia is correct about the procedure," he added, already looking past me to the next speaker. "Please submit your concerns in writing." I returned to my seat, acutely aware of the eyes on me. Some neighbors avoided my gaze entirely. Others offered subtle nods of solidarity. As the meeting concluded, I overheard Patricia speaking to a small group. "Some people simply do not understand that individual preferences must sometimes be sacrificed for the greater good of the community," she said, just loud enough for me to hear as I walked past. That night, I added the latest citation, for excessive wildlife encouragement, to the growing pile on my counter. The irony was not lost on me. My ducks were contained in my backyard, in a proper enclosure, fully compliant with both HOA and city regulations. I had checked and double-checked before bringing them home. As I watched them paddle contentedly through their evening swim, I wondered how long we would be able to maintain our little sanctuary against the rising tide of Patricia's disapproval. The situation deteriorated rapidly over the next few weeks. Anonymous complaints about my property began appearing in the HOA records. I only discovered this when requesting copies of all documents related to my address, a right guaranteed to me as a homeowner in the association. The complaints were vague but damning. Persistent unpleasant odors, excessive noise at early hours, and unsanitary conditions attracting vermin. None of these issues were real, but they were now part of my official record. My ducks were immaculately cared for. Their enclosure was cleaned daily, their pond maintained with proper filtration, and their noise level was minimal, certainly less disturbing than the gas leaf blowers Patricia herself used at 7 a.m. sharp every Saturday. Something was not adding up, and my suspicions were growing stronger by the day. "You should consider setting up cameras," suggested my neighbor Thomas, a retired security consultant who had become one of my few allies in the neighborhood. "If someone is entering your property without permission, you have a right to know." His advice made sense, especially after I noticed small disturbances around the yard. A gate left slightly ajar, duck feed scattered differently than I had left it, a filter setting changed on the pond. The security cameras were installed professionally the following week, 4 discrete units covering the entire property, including the duck enclosure. I did not have to wait long for results. The very next morning, the motion alerts on my phone began buzzing at 6:30 a.m. The footage showed Patricia moving along the edge of my property, phone in hand, taking photos of the duck enclosure from different angles. She did not cross the property line, but she was methodically documenting something. 2 days later, she grew bolder. The cameras captured her actually entering my backyard through the side gate, carefully stepping around the perimeter of the duck pond, taking close-up photos of normal, minimal waste near the water's edge. She then quickly exited the way she came. The trespassing was clear, but her purpose remained mysterious until the next HOA meeting notification arrived in my mailbox. The agenda included a special item: discussion of health hazards associated with non-traditional pets. Attached was a packet of evidence, including Patricia's photos, with misleading captions suggesting unsanitary conditions. The images were framed to make normal duck behavior look problematic. A small puddle from their water play was labeled standing water breeding mosquitoes. Regular duck droppings were described as excessive fecal contamination. The realization hit me like a physical blow. This was not random harassment. This was a calculated campaign to force me to remove my ducks. But why? What had I done to deserve such focused attention? The answer came from an unexpected source. Lisa, who lived 3 doors down, approached me hesitantly at the community mailboxes. "I do not want to get involved," she whispered, glancing around nervously. "But you should know this started after you declined Patricia's business opportunity." When I looked confused, she continued, "The essential oils. At the welcome barbecue last summer. She approached several of us, but you were the only one who directly told her you were not interested in joining her distribution network." The memory clicked into place. Patricia had cornered me at the community barbecue shortly after moving in, enthusiastically describing the life-changing opportunity of selling essential oils as part of her multi-level marketing business. I had politely but firmly declined, explaining that I was happy with my current job. She had smiled and moved on to her next target, but apparently my rejection had not been forgotten. The final straw came in the form of an official letter from the HOA board. It arrived in a certified envelope requiring my signature. Inside was a formal notice that my property had been found in violation of Section 8, Paragraph 12 of the Community Guidelines. No homeowner shall maintain any condition that creates unsanitary, unsightly, or disturbing environments for neighboring properties. The letter continued with an ultimatum: either remove the unsanitary and disruptive waterfowl situation within 30 days or face significant daily fines. It was signed by the board president, but I had no doubt who had orchestrated it. The letter shook in my hands as I realized the severity of the threat. My ducks were not just pets, they were my source of joy and comfort. The thought of losing them was unbearable. That evening, I sat beside the pond, watching as Alexander led his flock in circles around the water. Bella splashed playfully while Charlie stayed close to the reeds, his usual hiding spot. Daisy and Elvis groomed each other's feathers in perfect sync. They were blissfully unaware that their home was under threat, that their very existence had somehow become a battlefield in a neighborhood power struggle. As the sunset painted the water orange and gold, I made a decision. I would not give up without a fight, and I would not allow Patricia Montgomery to use the HOA as a weapon against me or my ducks. The morning started like any other Thursday. I left for work at 7:15 a.m., giving the ducks their breakfast and making sure their enclosure was secure before driving off. The day at the office was busy but unremarkable, spreadsheets and conference calls filling the hours. I had no idea that while I was sitting in meetings, a bizarre scenario was unfolding in my driveway. My first indication that something was wrong came at 5:30 p.m. as I turned onto my street. Cars lined both sides of the road, creating an unusual bottleneck. As I approached my house, I slowed to a crawl, trying to process what I was seeing. My entire driveway had been transformed into what looked like a catered event. 3 folding tables draped with floral tablecloths stretched across the concrete. Chairs were arranged in neat rows. A buffet of casseroles, salads, and desserts covered the central table. And people, at least 20 of my neighbors, stood around holding plates and plastic cups, many looking as confused as I felt. I parked at the curb, unable to access my own garage. As I stepped out of my car, conversations hushed. Eyes turned toward me with a mixture of sympathy and curiosity. And there, directing a man where to place a cooler of beverages, stood Patricia Montgomery. Her crisp white pantsuit was spotless, her blonde bob perfectly in place, and her red lipstick matched her manicured nails. She looked like she was hosting a garden party on my property. "What is happening here?" I asked, my voice strained as I approached the edge of my own driveway. "Why are there tables and people on my property?" Patricia turned with practiced surprise. "Oh, you have finally arrived. Everyone, our final homeowner has joined us for the quarterly property inspection potluck." She gestured grandly at the uncomfortable gathering, as announced in the newsletter that went out last week. "There was no announcement about a potluck at my house," I said, trying to keep my voice steady despite the surreal situation. "And certainly no permission granted to set up on my property." Patricia's smile remained fixed, but her eyes hardened. "As per HOA Bylaws, Section 3, Paragraph 8, the board reserves the right to conduct regular inspections of properties to ensure community standards are maintained. We decided to combine our inspection with a community building event." She consulted her clipboard. The newsletter clearly stated rotation of locations. "This quarter, it is your turn." I scanned the faces around me. Most neighbors looked uncomfortable, shifting their weight from foot to foot. A few of Patricia's closest allies stood near her, nodding in agreement. The board president was notably absent. "I receive every HOA communication," I said firmly. "There was no notification about this event, and even if there had been, you cannot simply take over someone's private property without explicit permission." "Your electronic acknowledgement was recorded," Patricia countered smoothly. "Perhaps you should check your email more carefully. Now, as we are conducting an official inspection, would you mind if we take a look at the backyard situation? There have been multiple complaints about odor and noise." Her emphasis on situation made her meaning clear. This was never about a community potluck. It was a calculated public humiliation and an excuse to investigate my ducks with witnesses present. The realization must have shown on my face because Patricia's smile widened slightly. She had me cornered. "Everyone, please help yourselves to the wonderful dishes our community has prepared," she announced, gesturing toward the food, "while we complete the formal inspection portion of our gathering." Patricia stepped toward me, lowering her voice. "Now, shall we go see those ducks that have been causing so much concern? The committee members are particularly interested in documenting the environmental impact." I felt trapped in a nightmare. Neighbors I had lived beside for years were standing in my driveway, eating potluck food, while Patricia prepared to lead a procession to my backyard to build a case against my pets. My hands trembled slightly as anger and helplessness fought for dominance. "This is inappropriate and unauthorized," I stated, loud enough for those nearby to hear. "I do not consent to this inspection or this gathering. I am asking everyone to please leave my property immediately." Patricia's expression hardened. Refusing an inspection is a direct violation of HOA bylaws. Section 5, paragraph 17 clearly states that homeowners must comply with board-initiated inspections or face significant penalties. She pulled a folder from her clipboard. "I have here documented complaints from 7 households regarding unsanitary conditions." She held up photos, the same misleading images she had taken during her unauthorized visit to my property. I felt a flush of heat rise up my neck and into my face. Not only had she trespassed, but she was now using her ill-gotten evidence to publicly shame me. Several neighbors were now watching the confrontation with undisguised interest. "Those photos were taken illegally when you trespassed on my property," I said, my voice cracking slightly with emotion. "I have security camera footage of you entering my backyard without permission and staging those photos." For a brief moment, Patricia's composure faltered. She clearly had not anticipated that I had installed cameras. But she recovered quickly, her smile returning with renewed determination. "The HOA board has authority to enter common areas and limited access to private property for documented concerns," she countered, though with slightly less confidence. "Now, we can conduct this inspection professionally, or we can note your refusal to comply, which will unfortunately result in automatic findings against you." I stood frozen, aware that I was being maneuvered into an impossible position. The tables of food, the gathered neighbors, the clipboard, the folder of evidence. It was all designed to maximize my humiliation and minimize my ability to defend myself. This was not about rules or community standards. It was about power and revenge, executed with meticulous planning. "I need everyone to leave," I repeated, my voice barely above a whisper. "This gathering is unauthorized. This inspection is unauthorized. I will be contacting my attorney." Without waiting for her response, I turned and walked into my house, closing the door firmly behind me. Through the blinds, I watched as Patricia recovered from the momentary setback, addressing the crowd with animated gestures. Some neighbors looked genuinely concerned, others embarrassed to be part of the spectacle. But no one left. The tables remained in my driveway. The inspection continued without me. Inside, I leaned against the wall, heart racing, a mixture of anger and humiliation washing over me. My phone buzzed with an incoming text from Thomas. "This is wrong. Document everything. Fight back. I am on your side." In the backyard, I could hear my ducks quacking softly, oblivious to the drama unfolding. As I watched Patricia pointing various committee members toward my backyard from the window, something shifted inside me. The helplessness gave way to determination. She had crossed a line, and now it was my turn to respond. But I would not stoop to her level. I would be strategic. I would be thorough. And I would be completely within my rights. That night, after the last neighbor had finally left my driveway, taking their potluck dishes but leaving behind scattered napkins and a folding chair no one claimed, I began my research. The dining room table disappeared under stacks of HOA documents, local ordinances, and property laws. I had requested complete copies of every bylaw, amendment, and meeting minute from the past year. Many documents I had never seen before, despite being told they had been distributed to all homeowners. Hours turned into days as I highlighted sections, made notes, and connected dots. A pattern emerged, not just of targeting me, but of procedural violations and overreach that affected the entire neighborhood. The HOA board was required to provide 14 days' notice before any inspection. Inspections could only be conducted during specified hours, with the homeowner present, and could not include other residents without written consent. Community events required a vote and permits from the city, not just board approval. But the most disturbing discovery came when I reviewed the HOA financial statements. Small discrepancies appeared throughout, line items for community improvement with no corresponding improvements, administrative fees that exceeded the caps set in the bylaws, and fines collected that never appeared in the general fund. It was not definitive proof of mismanagement, but it raised serious questions. The camera footage became my most valuable evidence. Not just Patricia's trespassing, but the entire unauthorized potluck inspection. I had captured hours of video showing neighbors on my property without permission, Patricia directing people around as if she owned the place, and most importantly, her specific statements about the inspection that contradicted the bylaws she claimed to be enforcing. 5 days after the incident, I met with Sarah, a law school friend who specialized in property disputes. We sat in her office surrounded by the evidence I had gathered, her expression growing increasingly concerned as she reviewed the materials. "This is not just HOA overreach," she said finally, setting down the folder of financial discrepancies. "There are potential legal violations here, trespassing, harassment, possibly even misappropriation of funds if these financial irregularities are what they appear to be." She leaned back in her chair. "You have options, but you need to be strategic. This type of situation can turn neighbors against each other very quickly." I nodded, already aware of the social dynamics at play. I do not want to create more conflict. I just want to protect my home and my ducks and maybe prevent this from happening to someone else. Sarah outlined a multi-part plan that would allow me to assert my rights while building support within the community. The first step was documentation, continuing to gather evidence of violations. The second was education, informing other homeowners of their rights under the bylaws. The third was confrontation, but not the kind Patricia would expect. "You need to be prepared for backlash," Sarah warned as I was leaving. "People like this Patricia do not give up power easily. They fight dirty. But if you stay completely within the rules while holding them accountable to those same rules, you have the advantage." The preparation took another week. I created a detailed chronology of events, organized my evidence, and prepared formal complaints to both the HOA board and the county property association that governed all HOAs in our region. I printed copies of the relevant bylaws and highlighted the sections that had been violated. I reviewed my security camera setup, adding 2 additional cameras with clearer views of the property boundaries. The most difficult part was reaching out to neighbors. I started with those I trusted: Thomas, Mrs. Peterson, the Johnsons, sharing some of what I had discovered about procedural violations that affected everyone. Most were supportive, though cautious about getting involved directly. A few shared their own stories of intimidation or selective enforcement. Gradually, a network of concerned homeowners began to form. Throughout this process, the harassment continued. New violation notices appeared in my mailbox. Anonymous complaints multiplied. Patricia made a point of walking past my home multiple times a day, sometimes stopping to take photos or make notes. The pressure was constant, designed to make me either comply or move away. My ducks became my emotional anchor during this turbulent time. Each morning and evening, I would sit by their pond, finding peace in their simple routines. Alexander would always approach first, accepting treats from my hand while keeping a protective eye on the others. Bella would splash and show off, while shy Charlie would gradually edge closer. Daisy and Elvis remained inseparable, their synchronized swimming a reminder of loyalty and partnership. One evening, As I sat watching them, I realized that Patricia had underestimated not just my resolve, but also what these animals meant to me. They were not just pets. They were a symbol of the simple joy and natural beauty that I had worked hard to create. They represented everything her sterile, controlled vision of the neighborhood sought to eliminate. The final piece of my plan fell into place when I discovered that Patricia had scheduled another community inspection for the following Saturday, this time at the Johnson family's home, which featured a children's playhouse that violated the height restrictions Patricia had suddenly decided to enforce. The timing was perfect. The pieces were in place. The evidence was overwhelming. I reviewed my checklist one last time. Legal notices prepared, security cameras tested, documentation organized, witnesses ready. As I looked out the window toward Patricia's pristine house with its perfectly trimmed hedges and flawless exterior, I felt a calm determination replace the anger and helplessness that had consumed me for weeks. "You picked the wrong house," I whispered to myself. "The wrong person, and definitely the wrong ducks." Saturday morning arrived with perfect weather, clear skies, mild temperature, and a gentle breeze that carried the scent of flowering shrubs across the neighborhood. I was up before dawn, reviewing each step of my plan. The timing had to be precise, the execution flawless. By 8:00 a.m., I had positioned myself at my front window with a clear view of Patricia's house across the street and 3 doors down. The first part of my plan was already in motion. Certified letters had been delivered to each HOA board member the previous day, detailing the numerous bylaw violations committed by Patricia as vice president. Similar letters had been sent to the County Property Association and the local municipal code enforcement office. The documents included timestamps, photos, and specific references to the rules that had been broken. It was all completely legal, thoroughly documented, and impossible to dismiss. At precisely 8:30 a.m., I spotted Patricia emerging from her house, clipboard in hand, heading toward the Johnson family's home for her unauthorized inspection. She wore a cream-colored pantsuit that practically glowed in the morning light, her signature power outfit for confrontations. As expected, she took her usual route, which would bring her directly past my driveway. Perfect. I stepped outside with a stack of papers just as she approached. "Good morning, Patricia," I called pleasantly, nodding her momentary hesitation. "Beautiful day, is it not?" She recovered quickly, offering her practiced smile. "Indeed it is. If you will excuse me, I have official HOA business to attend to." "Actually," I replied, matching her tone, "I have something for you. These are formal notices of your violations of HOA bylaws, county property regulations, and local trespassing ordinances." I extended the documents toward her. "You will find everything thoroughly documented, including your unauthorized entry onto my property on March 17th, your illegal photography of my backyard, and your orchestration of an unauthorized gathering in my driveway on April 8th. Patricia's smile faltered. Her eyes darted from the papers to my face and back again. "This is ridiculous. As a board member, I have authority to conduct inspections." "According to Bylaw Section 4, Paragraph 3, I interrupted calmly, "inspections require 14 days written notice to the homeowner, must be conducted with the homeowner present, and cannot include non-board members without signed consent. I have documented 17 separate violations of this bylaw alone." I continued to hold out the papers. "You will also find evidence of financial discrepancies that have been forwarded to the county auditor." Her face flushed. The clipboard trembled slightly in her hand. "You are interfering with official HOA business," she said, her voice rising. "This will be noted in your file." "My file," I repeated with a small smile. The same file that contains falsified complaints and photographs taken during your unauthorized entry onto my property. The security camera footage makes for compelling evidence, Patricia. The county prosecutor was particularly interested in the trespassing aspects. For a moment she seemed genuinely shocked. Then her expression hardened. "You have no idea who you are dealing with," she hissed, abandoning her pleasant facade. "I have built this community. I have protected property values. I have maintained standards. You and your filthy ducks are a blight on this neighborhood, and I will not rest until they are gone." Her mask had slipped completely now, revealing the true nature of her vendetta. I remained calm, aware that my security cameras were recording every word. "I am not your enemy, Patricia. I am simply a homeowner exercising my rights under the very bylaws you claim to uphold. Please take these documents. They contain formal notice of my complaints and evidence of violations." With visible reluctance, she snatched the papers from my hand. "This changes nothing," she said, tucking them under her clipboard without looking at them. "The board stands behind me. Your complaints will be dismissed." "Perhaps," I acknowledged, "but the county property association and prosecutor might see things differently. Now, if you will excuse me, I need to prepare for visitors." I turned and walked back toward my house, hearing her footsteps resume their path toward the Johnsons' home. I checked my watch. Right on schedule. The next phase began 30 minutes later when Patricia was returning from her confrontation with the Johnson family. As expected, she took a detour, cutting across the corner of my front yard to better view my property. Another small but documented violation of the rules she claimed to defend. This time, I was ready. My security cameras recorded every step as she paused, took out her phone, and began photographing my front garden. I stepped outside again, causing her to spin around in surprise. "Patricia, I must remind you that you are currently trespassing on private property after receiving formal notice not to do so," I called out clearly, ensuring the cameras would capture my warning. "Additionally, you are in violation of Bylaw Section 2, Paragraph 11, which prohibits board members from entering private property without permission outside of authorized inspections." Her face contorted with anger. "This is a common area easement," she snapped, gesturing to the small strip of lawn she stood on. "I have every right to be here." "Actually, the easement ends 6 inches from the sidewalk," I replied, pointing to the nearly invisible property marker at her feet. "You are currently 18 inches onto private property. The survey documents are included in the paperwork I just gave you, along with the definition of repeated trespassing under County Statute 453.2. Something shifted in her expression, a flicker of uncertainty breaking through the anger. She took a step back onto the sidewalk, but her gaze remained defiant. "Your so-called evidence will not stand up. The board values my leadership. The community respects my standards. You are one homeowner with a grudge and an unsanitary hobby." "We will see," I said simply. Then I added, "By the way, those authorized bylaw amendments you mentioned at the last meeting, the ones restricting non-traditional pets, according to the county, they were never properly filed or approved. My ducks are still perfectly legal, both by county ordinance and HOA rules." The color drained from her face. This was information she had not expected me to discover. Before she could respond, a car pulled into my driveway. Thomas stepped out, followed by Mrs. Peterson. Behind them, the Johnsons walked up the sidewalk. More neighbors appeared, coming from different directions, all converging on my front yard. "What is this?" Patricia demanded, looking around at the gathering crowd. "This," I explained calmly, "is an authorized neighborhood meeting to discuss HOA governance, with proper notice filed with the county and consent from the property owner. all completely by the book. I gestured toward my house. We have copies of the bylaws, financial statements, and documented violations for everyone to review. Oh, and coffee and donuts in the dining room. Patricia stood frozen, watching as neighbors filed past her, nodding politely but avoiding her gaze. Some carried folders or notebooks. All had been briefed on the situation beforehand. This was not a mob. It was an informed group of homeowners prepared to exercise their rights, exactly the kind of community standards the HOA was supposed to protect. This is, Patricia sputtered, unable to find the words. Completely legal, I finished for her. You are welcome to join us, of course. As a board member, your input would be valuable. For a moment, she looked as if she might accept the invitation. Then her expression hardened once more. This is not over, she said through clenched teeth. She turned and walked rapidly toward her house, her cream pantsuit no longer quite so pristine, her perfect composure thoroughly disrupted. I smiled, checked my watch, and waited. The final phase was about to begin. 20 minutes later, as the meeting inside my house was getting underway, security camera alerts buzzed on my phone. Patricia was back, this time marching purposefully up my driveway. Her face was set in grim determination as she headed not toward the front door, but toward the side gate that led to the backyard, directly to my duck enclosure. I excused myself from the meeting, stepped outside, and watched as she unlatched the gate. This was the moment I had anticipated. Patricia was nothing if not predictable in her vindictiveness. Pushed into a corner, facing exposure and consequences, she had decided to gather more evidence against me and my ducks. As she disappeared into my backyard, I calmly pressed a button on my phone. The remote lock on the duck enclosure gate slid open with a soft click. Then I followed Patricia, keeping a reasonable distance, my phone recording everything. She stood at the edge of the pond, photographing water ripples and normal duck behavior, completely unaware that the enclosure gate behind her was now open. I cleared my throat, causing her to spin around. Trespassing again, Patricia, after formal notice and witnesses. That will be difficult to explain to the county prosecutor. I am conducting an emergency inspection based on reports of unusual odors and potential health hazards, she replied automatically, the lie coming easily to her lips. As VP of the HOA, I have that authority when public health is at risk. Interesting, I said, keeping my voice level. Do you have the required emergency inspection form with the board president's signature? Bylaw Section 4, Paragraph 8 specifies that emergency inspections require documented evidence of the emergency and prior authorization. Her eyes narrowed. I do not need to justify myself to you. These ducks are a health hazard and a violation of. She never finished the sentence. Alexander, always the leader, had noticed the open gate. With a soft quack of curiosity, he waddled out, followed closely by his flock. Patricia froze, suddenly aware of the 5 ducks approaching with innocent interest. "What is happening?" she demanded, taking a step back. "Control your animals immediately." "They are just curious," I explained calmly. "They have never seen anyone but me in their enclosure before. Certainly not someone trespassing on private property." The ducks continued their approach, quacking softly with curiosity. Bella, always the bold one, waddled right up to Patricia's designer shoes and gave them an investigative peck. Patricia stepped back with a gasp of horror, nearly losing her balance. "Call them off," she demanded, her voice rising in pitch. "This is completely inappropriate." "They are perfectly harmless," I assured her, making no move to intervene. "They are just exploring their territory. which you have entered without permission, I might add." The scene unfolded with perfect poetic justice. As Patricia attempted to back away from the advancing ducks, she bumped into the buffet table she had set up for her unauthorized gathering the week before, the very table she had left folded in my garden shed after the event. The impact caused her clipboard to fall, scattering her papers across the ground. The ducks, delighted by this new game, immediately began investigating the fallen items. Charlie, normally so shy, boldly picked up a sheet of paper in his bill, waddling away with what appeared to be one of the falsified complaint forms. Daisy and Elvis worked as a team, systematically inspecting every fallen document. Alexander stood guard, watching Patricia's every move, while Bella continued her fascination with the shiny buckles on Patricia's designer shoes. "This is outrageous," Patricia sputtered, trying unsuccessfully to retrieve her documents without getting too close to the ducks. "I will have these vermin removed by animal control immediately." "Animal control," I repeated thoughtfully. "That is interesting because I spoke with them last week. They confirmed that my duck habitat fully complies with all county regulations for domestic waterfowl. They even commented on how exemplary the setup is. I have their certification right here." I held up my phone, showing the official email. "I also have footage of your current trespassing, which is becoming a pattern that the prosecutor might find concerning." The color drained from Patricia's face as she realized the full extent of her miscalculation. Not only had she been caught trespassing again, but her justification for targeting my ducks had been systematically dismantled. The security cameras continued recording as she tried to gather her scattered papers, the ducks playfully thwarting her efforts at every turn. The final indignity came when Alexander, with perfect timing, left a distinctly duck-like calling card directly on top of her fallen clipboard. The natural behavior could not have been better coordinated if I had trained him for weeks. Patricia's expression of absolute horror was priceless. "You planned this," she accused, finally managing to collect most of her papers. "You let them out on purpose." "I did nothing of the sort," I replied honestly. "The gate appears to have malfunctioned. Perhaps it was not properly secured after your unauthorized entry. Regardless, the ducks are contained to my property, following all regulations. Your presence here, however, is another matter entirely." The side gate suddenly opened, revealing Thomas and several other neighbors who had come to investigate the commotion. They stood in stunned silence, taking in the scene. Patricia Montgomery, the feared HOA enforcer, surrounded by waddling ducks, her pristine outfit now marred with dirt and grass stains, her carefully arranged hair disheveled, and her composition thoroughly shattered. "Is everything all right out here?" Thomas asked, failing to hide his smile. We heard raised voices. "Everything is fine," I assured him. "Patricia was just leaving, after conducting what she describes as an emergency inspection without notice, permission, or the required documentation." Patricia straightened her jacket, attempting to recover some dignity despite the duck feather clinging to her sleeve. "This is not over," she said again, though with noticeably less conviction than before. She pushed past the gathered neighbors, clutching her disordered papers to her chest. "The meeting inside is going very well," Thomas informed me as we watched her retreat. "Several interesting financial questions have come up that the board will need to address." "How fortunate that we have documentation to help clarify those questions," I replied, just loud enough for Patricia to hear as she reached the gate. She paused for a moment, shoulders stiff, then continued without looking back. The neighbors exchanged glances, some openly smiling now. The balance of power had shifted, visibly and definitively. I turned my attention to my ducks, who were now contentedly exploring the yard as if nothing unusual had happened. "Good job, team," I whispered, offering them treats from my pocket. "Mission accomplished." The emergency HOA board meeting was called for the following Tuesday evening. The community center was filled to capacity, with every chair occupied and additional residents standing along the walls. The atmosphere was tense but expectant, like a courtroom awaiting a verdict. At the front table, the board members sat with unusually solemn expressions. Patricia's chair remained conspicuously empty. I sat quietly in the middle of the room, surrounded by supporters who had reviewed the evidence and understood the gravity of the situation. There was no need for me to speak. The documentation spoke volumes on its own: the unauthorized inspections, the falsified complaints, the financial discrepancies, and most damning of all, the security footage showing multiple instances of trespassing and harassment. The board president, looking significantly older than he had at previous meetings, called for order. "We are here to address serious allegations regarding the conduct of our vice president, Patricia Montgomery," he began, his voice steady but subdued. "The board has reviewed extensive documentation provided by multiple homeowners, and we have consulted with the County Property Association regarding appropriate action." A murmur ran through the crowd. This was not the dismissive response many had expected. "Based on the evidence presented," the president continued, "this board unanimously moves to remove Patricia Montgomery from her position, effective immediately. Additionally, we have initiated a full audit of HOA finances and procedures to address concerning patterns identified in the documentation." The vote was quick and decisive. Hands raised throughout the room, not a single one remaining down. Patricia Montgomery was removed from the HOA board with a unanimous vote of no confidence. She did not attend the meeting. By the time the votes were counted, a "for sale" sign had already appeared in front of her perfectly manicured lawn. The following weeks brought remarkable changes to our community. The interim board, led by Thomas and two other respected residents, began the process of revising bylaws to prevent similar abuses of power. The financial audit revealed numerous administrative fees that had been channeled into unauthorized projects, primarily aesthetic improvements to the areas surrounding Patricia's own property. Small penalties were assessed for her falsification of documents, but the most significant consequences came in the form of community response. The social currency Patricia had traded in influence, respect, control, had evaporated completely. By the time her house sold 3 weeks later, few neighbors even acknowledged her existence. For me, the most satisfying outcome was the complete dismissal of all complaints against my duck habitat. The new board not only confirmed its compliance, but actually highlighted it in the community newsletter as an example of responsible pet ownership. The monthly Yard of Interest feature included a photograph of my backyard pond, with Alexander proudly leading his flock across the water. Perhaps the greatest transformation, however, was in the community itself. The incident had revealed how thoroughly intimidation and selective enforcement had divided neighbors who should have been allies. As these tactics disappeared, a genuine sense of community began to emerge. This became evident at the summer block party, a real one, properly permitted and democratically organized. Children played games on the closed street while adults gathered around picnic tables, sharing food and conversation. My ducks, now minor celebrities, made a supervised appearance, delighting the younger residents who offered approved treats under my watchful eye. "Your ducks are the heroes of the neighborhood," Mrs. Peterson commented as we watched Alexander accept a lettuce leaf from her granddaughter's hand. Who would have thought those little waddlers would bring down a dictator? They were just being themselves, I replied with a smile. That was all it took. As summer turned to fall, the FOR sale sign in front of my house surprised some neighbors. Not because I was leaving under pressure, but because I had received an opportunity to expand my duck sanctuary. A small property on the edge of town, with a natural pond and space for rescue waterfowl, had become available. My modest home sold quickly to a young couple who asked detailed questions about maintaining the backyard pond. On moving day, Thomas and several neighbors helped load the last boxes into the truck. The ducks traveled in special carriers, surprisingly calm amid the activity. "We will miss you," Thomas said, shaking my hand firmly. "And the duck patrol, of course." "You are all welcome to visit," I assured him. "There is always room for more duck enthusiasts." As I drove away, I glanced in the rearview mirror at the neighborhood that had been both battlefield and home. The new HOA sign at the entrance now featured a simple motto: a community of neighbors. No mention of property values, standards, or rules, just people living together with mutual respect. In the carriers behind me, Alexander quacked softly, as if approving the peaceful resolution. Sometimes, I reflected, the most powerful response to tyranny is not confrontation but simply living authentically, following rules while refusing to be ruled. My ducks had taught me that lesson better than any human could have. By just being ducks, they had revealed the absurdity of control for its own sake. At my new property, with its natural pond and expanded enclosure, the ducks quickly settled into their upgraded habitat. Alexander still led his flock with dignified waddles. Bella still splashed with excessive enthusiasm. Charlie gradually became less shy in the more natural setting, and Daisy and Elvis remained inseparable companions. And sometimes, when visitors from the old neighborhood came by, they would bring stories of the continuing positive changes in the community, along with approved duck treats and a shared understanding that sometimes the most powerful form of resistance is simply living well, on your own terms, with principles that cannot be intimidated away.